Good day. I'm Donna Butts, Executive Director of Generations United, a role that I've had the honor of serving in for almost 27 years now. I want to thank you for joining us today as we release Healthier Lives Across Generations, a blueprint for intergenerational living. Generations United's mission is to improve the lives of children, youth, and older people through intergenerational collaboration, public policies, and programs for the enduring benefit of all. And the new blueprint was created in partnership with Jennifer Molinsky of Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies and Robin Stone from Leading Age. And what a fabulous partnership it's been. Thank you very much for your partnership. And it really has made for such a strong blueprint. The blueprint is also the result of an expert symposium we hosted at Harvard School of Design last spring and was informed by the voices of people living in intergenerational communities. We thank them for their invaluable input. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also shout out Allison Hart, GU's Housing Fellow, for her early leadership with the blueprint and the symposium. I know she's with us today, so thank you. So please join us in the conversation about the report on social media using the hashtags IG Living and IG Housing. The aim of our blueprint is to promote intergenerational living that's safe, encourages interaction, interdependence, and understanding between people of different generations, and allows everyone to share their talents and develop relationships that benefit individuals and their community. We believe intergenerational living is a promising solution to some of our society's most pressing issues, including the lack of affordable housing and the epidemics of loneliness, social isolation, and ageism that are felt most acutely by younger and older people. I want to thank our sponsors who've made it possible for us to conduct the symposium, produce the blueprint, and release it today. RRF Foundation for Aging, the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, and Cambia, who's really helped to make today possible. Thank you. So let's begin. Now it's my honor to introduce Jen Molinsky from Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, Housing and Aging Society program to give an overview of the blueprint. Jen, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'm delighted to be part of the release of the blueprint and to have been part of the process of creating it. I'm going to set the stage very briefly by talking about what we mean by intergenerational living, why it matters, some of the challenges we face in expanding this option to more people, and then I will introduce the blueprint and provide an overview of the strategies that it sets forth. So in the next slide, we have created a diagram here because intergenerational living covers a variety of housing and community types. There's a growing share of people who live together in multi-generational households, as depicted on the left, either as extended families that cross generations, or increasingly as people who are house sharing, such as graduate students who are living with older homeowners who have room to spare. Then there are communities in which multiple generations are living in their own private housing, but on a site or in a building as a community with shared spaces, amenities, and community life. And this is depicted on the right. These include co-housing, which is typically resident run and developed, as well as housing for older adults on college campuses where people participate in an intergenerational lifestyle. Models that are built for specific populations that offer programming and support, but where those ties across the generations are really, really paramount, such as housing for grandparents raising grandchildren. So we use the term intergenerational rather than multi-generational to indicate that people of different ages are living not just side by side, but are in fact engaged with each other in community. Lastly, it's possible to take an existing community and to create intergenerational connections within it, as in the bottom. So the blueprint acknowledges all of these settings, with most focus really on those intentional intergenerational communities. The next slide. We know that there are challenges in developing and living in these settings, but before that, I jumped ahead, I'm so sorry. We're going to talk about just a variety of housing and community types. So Just to give you a sense of what some of these look like, Treehouse at East Hampton, Bridge Meadows, which you'll hear more about today. These are organizations that are set up for families adopting from siblings, children, and often siblings from foster care, and elder adults who live on site in cottages or smaller apartments of their own, usually affordable, and everyone participates in those community life. We've got Plaza West here, which is a space for grandparents raising grandchildren in Washington, D.C. Home, Chicago, which has a variety of intergenerational settings, from units in which a younger person lives with older adults to mixed intergenerational apartments in the same building. And One Flushing, Queens, New York, which is a complex that offers housing and services and opportunities for connection for all ages in a mixed income community. Okay, the next slide. Now to the challenges. So we know that that intergenerational housing is really seeking to address a variety of challenges, both at the individual level and also at the policy level. So we've got high housing costs. Millions of older adults and younger adults are facing severe housing cost burdens, including with those burdens usually worse among young families and older adults. Availability of supports and services. This could be supports and services for older people, whether that be help with homemaking, with laundry, with shopping, but also young families are finding care hard to find, and caregiving is expensive. We have an epidemic of loneliness and social isolation in this country that brings serious health risks. Many older adults are seeking purposeful connection in these communities, but also the young parents can often be very isolated and lonely. Design, little housing in our country is physically accessible. We have estimates that it's under 4%. So while that is not a driving motivation for these communities, it is often a key feature of them that they be universally designed and available and open to people of all ages and abilities. Intergenerational communities can often serve as anchors in a neighborhood. They can be a place that offers services and space for the broader community, and they can also help to stabilize certain neighborhoods in some cases. And I think the last motivation is really equity, because many of the people who experience these challenges, the high housing costs, the isolation, the lack of accessibility, are those who have been historically denied equal access to housing. And so this can help. This is one opportunity to help address that disparity and those inequities. On the next slide, we know that there's a range of challenges in developing sustaining intergenerational communities. And many of these are common to all housing development, especially housing development that is seeking to be affordable to households with lower incomes. These include the difficulties of finding a suitable site, securing financing that can involve multiple forms of subsidy, all of which have their own special requirements and conditions. But intergenerational communities can have some unique challenges because community is so central to the whole premise. There needs to be adequate community space, for which there isn't always funding. The community needs to be nurtured and sustained over time, even as individuals' needs may change throughout their lives, as older adults may need more support, as children grow up, and as families come and go. So that needs to be a real part of the design and the ongoing programming and support for these communities. There can also be constraints with certain funding sources or with fair housing law, which allows for age-restricted housing if 80% of households include a person 55 or over. But an intentionally much more age-mixed community can be hard to sustain over time. So these are some of the challenges that we are aware of through previous research, including some that the Joint Center has done. I think there's also the perception that these are one-off solutions, really wonderful where they happen, but largely dependent on the passion and personality of a group of people or a specific organization that has founded them. I think that uniqueness is a really fundamental way that these communities bring great things to communities and to individuals, but many of the challenges that these different communities face are actually quite similar across the board, and that's something that we learned through this process. And we believe that there are steps that we can take to dismantle some of the barriers and to prove the case, make more evidence that this is a model worth pursuing. So we'll turn next to the blueprint itself on the next slide. The blueprint really advances 4 strategies. The first is building research that explores the role of intergenerational communities in a variety of outcomes: physical health, mental health, social connection, the need for care, youth outcomes, and also explores how communities might achieve these outcomes. What is it that makes these outcomes occur when they occur? Is it the design? Is it the programming? What is happening? A second strategy is about communication, creating a compelling narrative and building awareness about these models among housing policymakers, local planners, developers, and financiers, and the general public, who then might be able to envision what an intergenerational community could look like in their neighborhood. Third, the blueprint offers a list of policy and funding suggestions, including removing some of those barriers to the use of existing subsidies, creating dedicated programs, prioritizing intergenerational living and programs like low-income housing tax credits, and more. And finally, the blueprint proposes ways that we can share lessons learned from existing communities, highlighting promising practices, key design elements, and more, and creating mechanisms for technical support. Just the last page shows these a little bit more. The last slide in my section here shows you a handful of these, but we really invite you to go to the blueprint and investigate all of these more. This is a call to action intended for a broad audience of all sorts of folks, including individuals who are just really interested in greater housing options for all ages. And there really is a role for everyone, for government, for advocates, for developers and service organizations, for philanthropy, for citizens and activists, in smoothing the way for future communities and sustaining those that are already working. So we invite you to take a closer look and find ways to get involved. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the next section of the program, Marvell Adams, the CEO of Caregiver Action Network. Before Marvell joins us, we have a short video from one of the partner organizations involved in the creation of the blueprint, Bridge Meadows, and that will give you a sense of life in an intergenerational community.
Older adults will soon outnumber children on a global scale. So in a new series, our brief but spectacular team is exploring our evolving beliefs about age. Tonight, we bring you the story of Bridge Meadows, an innovative multi-generational housing community in Oregon that builds connections between foster youth, their families, and elders. Here now are 3 generations of Bridge Meadows residents on how living in this vibrant community has transformed their lives for the better.
When they told us about this place, literally, we were both kind of looking at each other like, is that real?
They're not right here, then. I've been living here in Bridge Meadows for 7 years.
Grandma Kathy takes care of me and my brother when my parents are away.
I still remember the first time they called me Grandma Kathy. Bridge Meadows is an intergenerational living space where we have children that have come out of foster homes, and then we have elders. My husband had just passed away in 2016. We didn't have the income, and so I had signed up for low-income housing. They told me about Bridge Meadows. Bridge Meadows gave me the opportunity to come into other people's lives.
We're all set up here in a little semicircle.
When we got married, we initially were very clear with each other. We wanted to be parents. Of course, we ran into, issues, fertility stuff and that kind of thing.
And then I was like, hey, we got an extra room, we got space, we are a good couple, and we have love to give, and this community needs us.
At this point, we've fostered 14 kids in total over the course of a number of years, and adopted 2.
My name is Victor and I'm 9 years old. This is my brother, Cam. My name is Cam. I'm going into 2nd grade.
When you're in the mix, when you're being a foster parent and doing all the day-to-day stuff, you don't always have the supports. Grandma Kathy is a member of our community that we met early on after moving here.
Victor was this little guy just running around, just full of energy. I was holding Cam, and he was a baby at the time. I just looked into his eyes and I just fell in love with him.
She helps us when we need a little break.
She is the biggest hearted person that you can imagine.
Part of the design is for me to provide support for other families.
The intentionality of the place means that there's always that understanding that we're all here to connect with each other. If ever you need that connection, it's there for you. Our elder neighbors are dealing with elder issues. We have a community support specialist that their specific focus is to make sure that the elders in our community are being as well served as the families and the children. So that means if they need a ride to a doctor visit, that can be provided for them.
Well, I have 8 of my own grandchildren, and I'm so far away from them that I don't get to see them. And these little boys, they are just so special, and I'm just proud to be their grandma.
It's been transformative for our kids. My name is Brian Parker.
My name is Josie Parker
And this is our brief but spectacular take
on family.
Wow. I feel almost a bit hamstrung following that video because it is quite emotional. And thank you so much. As said, my name is Marvell Adams Jr. I serve as CEO of the Caregiver Action Network, a not-for-profit based in Washington, D.C. that supports caregivers, just like many of the ones that you just saw in that video. Today, I'm going to be moderating a panel of amazing individuals that'll be starting off with an interview with one of our participants. But just a quick list of introductions that Constance Hatchett is with us today, who is a resident of Home Good Life Senior Residences. Also joining us in a little bit after my hi there, Constance. Also joining us in a moment after our conversation with Constance will be Nikki Mustafa, who's the housing director for Home, along with Catherine Buell, a Loeb Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, as well as Margu Muchinsky from the Pennsylvania Department of Aging. But first, and definitely most importantly, we are here with Constance, who is a resident at Good Life Senior Residences. Constance, how are you, my friend?
I'm truly blessed. How about yourself?
I'm blessed as well. I'm really, really glad to be here with you today. So wonderful you could make it, and just looking forward to our conversation. I have to start off with by asking you what first drew you to live at home at Good Life senior residences, because it's not necessarily a slam dunk decision for everyone, but I imagine you had some early on thoughts that drew you to this decision.
Of course it did. I was in a place, some familiar, but not exactly like this. Also, I have my sister-in-law that say, come see where I'm living. And so when me and my husband was present living at that time, he passed away a year ago. And we came and we were like, man, this is beautiful here. All the stuff they had to offer, the gym, the community room, the library, the space itself, and the friendliness of the staff. And the people was like, you're moving here? You're going to be a party? And we're like, if the Lord be it, yeah. And so the energy of the people, that you was good feeling it. When you feel something, you want to be a part of something good.
Yeah. And how long have you lived there?
Going on a total of 9 years.
Oh my goodness. So that's really your family. That really is your family now.
Truly is. The staff, they ain't staff, they're family. Everybody is one big family. That's how I can explain it. We one big happy family. I don't care what walks of life you come from. The children, they belong to Natalie Salmon. We call them the Natalie Salmon children.
Oh,
they
wow.
belong to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's the goal. That is absolutely the goal. And so, as you think about your time there over the last 9 years, what do you value most about being a part of that community?
But I value most is the fact that the staff listens and they are here to your situations. They always have an ear to hear. If you have an ear to hear, then you can hear what the people are saying. And therefore, they hear it in there. They say, okay, let's see what we can do about it. I've been places where you tell them, and they don't even come back with you. They don't even care. But here, they totally care about you. The people here, if something happens, everybody gonna be there. Somebody pet, everybody's gonna be there. Birthdays, everybody's gonna be there. And so that's what I like about it. The joy we have here.
Oh, the joy we have here. Oh, that seems like that has to be one of the largest, most descriptive words of your experience there. The joy as well as the listening ear. I think that is so profound.
Yes.
Wow. So, I'm curious to just hear a story, if you would, so being able to be amongst an intergenerational group of family, which amazingly is seems like such a strange thing for us to say, but it's not. It is exactly how it is meant to be. We all grew up intergenerationally with parents and with cousins and with grandparents and with nieces and nephews. And so I would be curious to hear about, tell us a story about your experience with younger residents there, the younger
Actually, I have
residents there.
a family that lives across the way from me. It's a family of 3. She's a hearing impaired. And I had the option of coming Christmas when she first moved in. I went and presented her with the gift that came from home organization. And the joy that was on the kids' faces and her faces, she reading my lips, she's understanding what I'm saying. I know a little sign, I ain't great in sign, but I know a little bit. And just to see the joy that it brought to that family, it brought joy to me. To give and know somebody love for what you done, unlovable. I mean, that is the grace and the joy that comes to my heart.
Oh, wow. That is truly amazing. I mean, even to consider that one might see it as a difficult to surmount barrier of having a connection with someone that's hearing impaired. But it sounds like, just with the communal love within the organization, that being able to just go and just be embraced and embrace your new neighbor. That's wonderful.
Yes, yes.
Wow. And I can't help but ask, what was the gift that you took over?
Oh, it was so much for the boys and the boys' toys, the girl toys, and then for the parents, for the men and the women. So it's just a great thing to even like to open up and see them say, oh, I got a coat or I got a toy or I got a doll, and the joy on those children's faces, on the parent faces was just filling for me. I have grandkids, so I know what the feeling is for them to get something. Something small means they're great to many.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can just tell from your voice and the smile on your face, Constance, that it is an absolute joy, as you said, being within that community. And I can know without being there with you that you are bringing a lot of joy to your neighbors and your family there. So, wow, thank you so much for
You're
sharing your
welcome.
story. And for being there for all the individuals, your neighbors and friends there at Good Life Senior Residences. So thank you so much, Constance.
You're welcome, and you have a blessed day.
You too. Take care.
You too.
All right. So I will now invite our panel to come onto screen. Nikki Mustafa, who's the housing director at Home, as well as Catherine Buell, who is the Loeb Fellow in Harvard Graduate School of Design, and Margaret Muchinsky from the Pennsylvania Department of Aging. Welcome to each of you. How are you doing today?
Great.
Wonderful, wonderful. I know Constance, as you might imagine, was a hard act to follow. So, just don't feel too much pressure, but you'll do just fine. So, Nikki, as it probably makes sense as the director there at Home, I would love to start with you and just ask, what resonates you about what Constance's remarks? I'm sure, they aren't necessarily rare to hear that from a resident there, but, what do you think draws older residents and younger resident assistants to live there at Home?
It's really about being part of a community. I think it's natural for all people to want to live in a community. Loneliness is an epidemic, especially among older adults, as we all know. And we have a lot of older adults that have been living alone for a long time. And there's something so special about even sharing a meal with people. Simple things that we sort of take for granted that just sitting down with a group and having your lunch, there's something about that kind of reminds you like, hey, I have a community around me. I'm not by myself. I have people I can speak to if I would like to. And especially for the younger people, they are able to get some life advice. I mean, I tell my older adults that are living in the building, just as Constance says, the kids belong to all of us. All of the older adults also belong to me. They're all part of my family now. And, I always tell them that they have this wealth of knowledge. They have lived a lifetime before me. There's so much that we can learn just by listening to them.
Yeah. Oh, wow. No, it's amazing to hear that at times it sounds like this, grand innovation to actually live amongst other generations. But, it really, the strangeness is when we segregate people based on their age, and disease or condition. And this is just such a way of creating community in the way that it really was meant to be. So thank you for the comments, Nikki. I'll come back to you in just a little bit. Catherine, just wanted to invite you into the conversation. As a Loeb Fellow, you've had, special expertise in, or have special expertise in design and building environments, which is a key aspect of building community, no matter what the size or reason for it. So, what are some of the key components to making a space that builds community, and which aspects are especially important for intergenerational living?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to mention some context for where I come from. Prior to completing the Loeb Fellowship, I ran the Atlanta Housing Authority, but I also created and launched the Amazon Housing Equity Fund, which was Amazon's, at the time I launched it, $2+ billion commitment to creating and preserving 21,000 affordable homes across the US. And it did just that through its capital commitment. And in taking a step back, I thought it was so exciting that that a tech firm and private corporations could step into that role, particularly coming from the public housing side. But I was also struck by what that money could not do. My own mother has dementia, and I saw the impact that loneliness had on her during COVID and the impact on her health. And I really wanted to dig into that and understand more specifically what was going on in the housing world and what innovative solutions existed. So at the Loeb Fellowship, a couple of things really struck me around community design and what we could do. First, the growth of this thing called wellness real estate. I was so excited to see that there are communities coming online focused on well-being, health, intersection of housing. I just came back from a placemaking conference at a place called Serenbe. It's one of the first wellness real estate communities established in the country. They've designed a community that enhances your well-being, and it's age-friendly, if you can believe it. They're designing an aging in place section of their community to make sure that their community members can be part of this intergenerational community. So there are so many beautiful models, but also that the housing field is just not catching up. Community design can solve so much around how we design the communities. Do we want to get out and walk in our communities? Is there biophilic design? Is it safe? Are we in a heat map and surrounded by concrete? Not just the intentional community centers, but what are those unintentional but design spaces that allow us to get out and interact? And last thing I'll mention is this notion of isolation and loneliness. The US Surgeon General has pointed out that loneliness is an epidemic in our country, and so much of that actually has to do with our community design. There are communities that are being designed to have front porches and make sure that social interaction is encouraged. And when you start talking about different groups and different ages, making sure that we're intentional about including everybody, because loneliness is an epidemic, and it's an epidemic not just for those who are getting older. It's an epidemic that we're seeing across all ages. And so the level of interaction that we're going to need through innovative solutions like intergenerational housing is significant.
Wow. No, you really cut through a lot of the major issues there. Catherine, it's amazing to see just how important community has come back into the conversation, after the pandemic. I think it drove home to everyone, like, wait a minute, this isn't how it's supposed to feel. The idea of being at home, people
Exactly.
will think, oh, that'd be great. And we found ourselves so isolated during that pandemic that people really started to realize the pieces of community that we hold dear aren't quite all together. And so it's amazing to see for you to be able to create spaces and show individuals this is how you create community in the spaces in which you live. So wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
And if I can share one anecdote, there's a professor at Harvard, Dr. Jeremy Noble, who wrote a book called Project Unlonely, which I was so encouraged by, healing about how arts and different therapies can address loneliness. But one of the things he said that in his practice, when he sees health outcomes declining, he asks people about their social safety, their social network. Are they isolated in place? And the fact that a doctor, a physician, is making those connections and investing in the research and the data that's needed to say, hey, if you don't have those social connections, if you don't have people to go to dinner with casually, you're not interacting with your neighbors, your health outcomes are not going to be as great. And him asking that question of his patients, to me, said this is a bigger issue than I think we fully appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, well worth said, because it's amazing to see just how intentional folks are being now, but also understanding that, you know, question of do you have friends? Do you have someone that you speak with regularly that it's not a chore to do that, you
That's
know,
right.
you can casually connect with folks. So I love that. Thank you, Catherine. So, Margot, I want to bring you into our conversation, if that's all right, and just talk a little bit about your work with Share that involves making matches between homeowners and individuals seeking housing. You know, with that housing pricing that we have right in front of us, this sounds like such an amazing approach to understanding how we can really close the gap in the housing crisis. So, one of the participants must be over the age of 60. But what are some of the secrets to making a successful intergenerational match?
Thank you. So I think one of the first things that comes to mind when making a successful match, and there really is no perfect match, as we all know, but one of the things that I think is very important is it's participant choice. The participants in our Share housing program, they have a choice with whom they live. And I think that's very important. They have an introduction with someone, and that gives them the opportunity to discuss common interests, get to know each other a little bit, to see if maybe there is a chance that would be a good match. If it isn't, it's okay. That introduction, it's fine. They both walk away, and it's possible they could both go into different introductions the next day or the next week or the next 2 weeks or whatever. So participant choice, I think, is very important. Also, we have Share housing counselors in our program in each of the counties that participate, and they provide clear, concise communication with participants. And I think that has led to some successful intergenerational matches and non-intergenerational as well. We have both. And I think the way that they communicate with these folks has just made an incredible difference. They make everything clear, concise, what the expectations are, so that they walk away and they know what the next steps are and what happens next with the program and what's expected of them in a match with each of the participants. They also, our Share counselors also listen to the participants. We have an application process that they go through with each participant, and that can take upwards of 2 hours, because we really encourage the participants to talk and tell us about your life. Tell us about how you want to live, where you want to live, who you want to live with, and what that looks like. And our Share housing counselors listen to all that and take it all in, so that when they're making matches, they're thinking of these people and what their choices are and what their likes, dislikes, their preferences are, so that they can make better matches. And lastly, having a Share housing counselor to stay in touch with our matches, I think, has been critical in the program. They stay in touch on a monthly basis. They call each participant by phone every month, And every quarter, they actually go out and visit the matches in person at the homes and talk to each participant to see how things are going and to see how they're interacting. And I think that has led to a lot of the success with our matches, because there is someone there in case there's an issue, a question, a concern, they may need a resource of some type. That share housing counselor is the key to those answers. They will provide that information to the match. So I think those are some of the critical things that make our matches successful. And we do have intergenerational matches in that college students are being matched with adults age 60 or older. And it's just a beautiful thing to see. And I think those housing counselors who are creating those matches have a sense of this intergenerational living is working. This is a win-win for these people involved. So I think those are the successes that we've been seeing with our program. And we're in our 8th year of having the share housing program in Pennsylvania. And I think it's going very successfully.
And within the state, what's the footprint of the program? Is it regionally within the state, or is it across the state?
It's across the state and it's by county. So each county, we have 57 area agencies on aging in Pennsylvania, and they voluntarily request to participate in this program. It's not a mandatory program in Pennsylvania. They request to participate. And we have 14 area agencies on aging right now that participate. And it's across the state. We're in all regions of the state now, and it's going well. It's actually going very well. And we are expanding every year. So every year we add at least one more county to our list. So it's very satisfying, I have to say.
Yeah. Wow. No, thank you so much for sharing that, Margot. As someone that had a 20-year career in aging services and nursing homes, assisted living, retirement communities, there was this old conventional wisdom that was never true, which is like, older adults don't want to be bothered by loudness of kids and and 20 somethings and teenagers. And it's like, that it's so the opposite of what a real community is. It's about the intergenerational connection. So really glad to hear about the successes you're having across Pennsylvania with this program. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you in just a moment with some more comments. So Nikki, as promised, I wanted to return to you. So with the release of the blueprint today, it uses the phrase intentional intergenerational living. Tell us why being intentional about building connections is important to your program, and what are some of the ways home is intentional about building connections across generations?
Intentionality is the name of the game when it comes to intergenerational living. So first, I just want to plug our housing. Otherwise, I would be doing a disservice to my organization. So Home offers 3 intergenerational buildings. So we have one that's a traditional Chicago 8 flat, one that's a traditional Chicago 6 flat, and then the Natalie Thalman House, where Constance is speaking to us from. And that was the first intentionally built intergenerational building that Home is aware of. And we're going to keep saying that until somebody can prove us wrong. So, we need to be able to facilitate those interactions easily between older adults and young people. And so that's really where the intentionality comes into it, is saying, setting up opportunities for people to socialize that are just easy and low accessibility. I apologize. I'm not alone today. I have a dog with me.
All right.
Her name is Sue Radley, and she's an older dog too. But,
I love the name.
So, setting up opportunities for people to socialize that are easy and barrier-free, such as, Connie can help me out here, but doing crafts or teaching people how to do things. Even today, we had an intergenerational moment where Connie was having some technical difficulties, and one of our wonderful staff members, Beth LaBrosse, who Connie
Yes.
has stolen her identity today. There's her hand. Stepped in and really kind of helped her out and was able to make sure that Connie was able to be here today and we could see her radiant face. And also just
Yes.
setting up opportunities where everyone feels safe and welcome. So making sure that we're providing that training, that education for everyone, that everyone is welcome here, that all of our activities are come as you are, our housing is come as you are, and reminding our staff that when you're in the buildings, you're in someone's home, so you need to behave accordingly.
Yeah, I really like that. Come as you are. That absolutely underscores just the intentionality of it. And Constance, I would be curious, would you
Yes.
add anything to that? Because it sounds like it really is such an amazing opportunity to do things purposefully and intentfully within the community. So, could you
Yes,
tell us a little
we
bit
have,
more about how you
yes, we have
connect?
a lot of programs. We have wrote 3 books, The Residents, and they've been published. We're on our 3rd publication coming off the press. And it's basically about our stories. No one's telling us how to write them. They're coming from our heart. The idea we have things for the birthdays. So we have big everything. We have bingo. We got a garden club. We got, and Beth, she is an honorable straight person. We go to her. She's like, okay, enough, but she rolled up her sleeves. And I appreciate her because she my left hand, I'm her right hand. And when we stand strong here, it's everybody. Those that do not know how to stand, we stand for them. So that's why it's such a family. Because sometimes people don't know what to say, so other people do it and they're able to say, oh, thank you for saying it for me. So this is how our community works. And when they want to go to the staff and don't know how, they just say, Constance, can you tell Beth? Can you tell Nikki? Can you tell, whoever that's over us? And I get it through and they listen.
Oh, wow. It's as you're saying that, Constance, I think of, the saying where it's like, it's not about adding, years to your life, but life to your years. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're able to experience there. So that's absolutely wonderful. I know through, many, many studies out there around longevity and living a thriving and fruitful life that is one of the biggest factors is having intergenerational life, of having young children at your feet is a much better indication of longevity than almost anything else. So really so glad to hear that. And they're helpful when you have technical difficulties too. So it's great.
Yes. That's what I say.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
We were a big family here. If
Wow.
somebody didn't
Thank
care,
you.
you think they would have helped. That's her problem. But here,
Exactly.
like I say, the staff is very, very helpful. They're caring. They too, something that comes from the heart reaches the heart. And here that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So Margot, want to come back to you. So we're focused on the benefits of intergenerational living. Clearly, so we know that there are also challenges within intergenerational living. And have you made any matches that are not quite made in heaven? As you said before, everyone has a choice, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll make as you said, it won't be perfect every time. So, what did you learn for those instances where the match wasn't quite right? And what tips do you have to avoid some of those challenges that may arise?
Great question. So every match is different. Every single match is different. Our matches, the home sharer can contribute to the home host's living expenses, or they can provide a service for them. A service exchange is what we refer to it as, or they could do both, or they could do neither. We have matches where there is no contribution to living expenses. It's simply companionship. And that's how every match is different. So a match can start out perfect in the world, right? And suddenly circumstances can change, as in everyone's life. A circumstance can change in an instant, right? So because of those changes, it's so important that our share counselors are in touch with our match participants, and they're there for them to provide any type of resource they need, and also to provide support, basically support for them when things kind of go sideways for them. And something that we've incorporated in the beginning of our program was having a good background check on all the participants in our program. We do a national background check, and we require full disclosure. And I think that helps a lot as well, because each participant gains trust when they know they're being told the truth and they're telling them things that they might be uncomfortable with. But I think that gains trust in a relationship. And I think we're learning that as the program grows, more people are telling us, you know, these are the things that have happened in my life. These are the things that, you know, I'm facing. These are the traumas that I have right now. And I think having that full disclosure and having our share counselors be on board with them has really helped make better matches and make our program better. One of the other things is our share counselors have a toolbox of resources that they utilize. And I think when they have situations with matches that can cause anxiety with a participant or bring up a past trauma with a participant, I think those resources that our counselors are able to provide to them are making our matches better, because they are able to stay in the match and receive a resource from the community, whatever that resource might be, to help them cope with what's happening while they're still in a housing situation. So housing's the number one issue, right? Housing's where it starts. And I think the fact that we're able to provide resources and support our participants allows them to stay in their housing longer. And the fact that every match is so different. So I think we've learned a lot from those different things. And we just keep trying to make it better and better as we go, as we learn those experiences.
Yeah, yeah, it's all about learning from those lessons and like the little hiccups that happen there. And I'm really encouraged and just so delighted to hear that, you know, trauma-informed care is such an important and integral part of all of this, you know. So some folks say trauma-informed care is important when it comes to older adults, it's important when it comes to younger adults, and you know, when it comes to intergenerational living, who among us, you know, at the very least through a pandemic, does not have some trauma in our lives, whether, you know, a small, big, or large, and understanding that your counselors have that lens is just really an important aspect. And I see how the intentionality comes back into it. Well, wow. Thank you, Catherine.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Margot. Apologize. So Catherine, want to come back to you again and just say that, so the blueprint is designed to encourage more intergenerational living. So as we've heard, you know, our next panel that's coming up will focus on addressing challenges and seizing opportunities to build more communities like these. But there is always the question, if you build it, will they come? And, you know, what do you think is needed in terms of communication and marketing to spread the word about intergenerational living?
Yeah. So prior to launching the Amazon Housing Equity Fund, one of the things that we did is we worked with the Urban Institute to get the data, but we also worked with an organization called the Case Made to do focus group work around, and this was specifically around affordability. And one of the things that we found is that people actually did not care about housing affordability the way that we thought they would. It's not a heartstring issue. It doesn't get people active. But if you talked about housing affordability in terms of regional growth, people paid attention. People wanted to hear what you have to say. This is something that I've been giving a lot of thought about, is how do you get people excited about intergenerational housing? There are so many solutions that we need to pursue, and we don't have a silver bullet. There isn't one specific type, and I'm so encouraged to hear all of the different program ideas from Margot's program to Nikki. It's really encouraging to see that there are options, but how do we talk about the shift that's happening in our country and the implications of the do nothing strategy? So for example, African Americans on average, and this is from the New York Times, are more likely to live alone at every age and stage of our lives. And when you talk about getting older, that means your health outcomes are going to be much tougher. This is a public health issue. This isn't just a housing issue. This isn't just a nice to have. It's an issue that's going to, quite frankly, cost all of us more if we don't come up with some sort of innovative solution. We need to talk about it in terms of a way that's exciting. A lot of people, when you say seniors and aging, even if they're over 65, they're like, that is not me. I don't know who you're talking about because I get up,
Yep.
I party,
Yep.
I hang out with everybody. I am active. So, and what's fascinating, going back to my Serenbe example, they created a 65 and older community. The houses didn't sell. They took off the age designation. They sold like hotcakes. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
folks like McKinsey and Company, who you wouldn't think talking about this issue. They've talked about it within the umbrella of their wellness practice. They talk about the desire for a lot of consumers to have age-friendly products, wellness products. So maybe changing the language that we're using to talk about this issue to get people excited, but also getting real data. We don't have enough data and people are not aware of the issue. When Jennifer talked about the fact that 1 in 5 Americans is soon to be over the age of 65, that's a very real number. Half of the 5-year-olds today will live to be 100. This issue is not going away. And so we need to find not just the right language and the way for it to be relatable, but it needs to be based in real data of what is this going to do if we do nothing and we don't come up with any solutions.
Wow. Catherine, thank you so much. And thank you to Margot, Nikki, Catherine, and Constance, every single one of you for participating today. Thank you for being a part of the panel and for giving such an energetic and intentional set of testimonials when it comes to intergenerational living. So, and now it is really my absolute pleasure to introduce my sister from another Mr. Mr. Derenda Schubert, who is the CEO of Bridge Meadows, who you saw that wonderful video all early on. So, Derenda, I will turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Marvell, for that beautiful introduction, and happy to be your sister. All right. Well, I am delighted to be here today, and thank you all so much for the joy you felt with watching our Bridge Meadows video, and thank you to our GU family and friends for that shout out. I am honored today to introduce you to 3 panelists who will discuss financing and cultural issues related to building intergenerational housing. And here are the panelists: Mr. Thomas Yu with Asian Americans for Equality, Mr. Mark Buenavista from Fairfax County, Virginia, Department of Housing and Community Development, and Ms. Nia Duggins from the National Association of Realtors. It's so nice to see all of you again, as we were together in March having these robust conversations about the Blueprint Report. So I'm really delighted to see you, my friends. So thank you for being here today. So we're going to start with Nia. Nia, you are with the National Association of Realtors, and we're wondering what policy recommendations within that blueprint do you think would be most impactful to incentivize more intergenerational living?
Thank you, Derenda, and thank you also for just this opportunity. I think this is a very important discussion and one that we have to keep really like elevated and advancing. So one of the major recommendations I would say is really focusing a lot on educating lawmakers and also policymakers on the benefits of intergenerational living. One of the things that Catherine mentioned in the prior panel is like, this is not the sexiest topic to some folks, although it's beneficial, right? It's almost like the vegetable analogy, right? Well, we know we need to eat our vegetables, but we choose like junk food instead, right? And so I think it is key that we make this topic really one that is common, right, for a lot of lawmakers. The other piece of it is figuring out the cost. I think one of the things that is a challenge across the board when we think about housing affordability and sustainability is the cost of building, the cost of what it takes in order to get a project from really conception to completion. And so figuring out ways that the federal government can be supportive to incentivize intergenerational living and housing solutions, I think, is extremely key. But then also getting other real estate stakeholders and policymakers on board. So figuring out a comprehensive way. I think this blueprint is a great start and a great way for us to have the discussion. But I think there are several ways that we can do this by getting also the home builders involved and additional developers involved. City planners also play a critical role in this conversation as well. And the healthcare industry, quite honestly, healthcare providers, because the cost of healthcare, right, in our country could look a lot different if housing and housing outcomes look different.
I really appreciate you speaking about health and housing, Mia, because we have so much siloed um, departments, where housing's over here and health is over here. But if we join them together, we're going to have better outcomes for all. So thank you. All right, Mark. So building on what Nia's just said, what specific policy recommendations in the blueprint do you think will be essential to support the development of intergenerational housing?
Certainly, I think Nia touched on many of the things that I'm certainly looking at, and with others in my organization. But I sort of want to touch back to some of the themes that were running from the previous panel, where fundamentally we're really talking about the intergenerational housing issue as one of building community. So I sort of think of that through the lens of a concept that I wasn't familiar with, sort of a West African, South African concept, Ubuntu, and I'm sure I'm butchering it. I am, because we are, right? And so while we are looking at the lens of housing specifically, which is very foundational, I think many of the folks on the panels can attest that this is really sort of a cross-sectional issue, and certainly housing has a piece to play. And so, looking at from the policy perspective, and even just sort of the technical side of how you deliver more supply, right, fundamentally comes down to, well, what are the communities that we're trying to engender? How are we bringing people into the fold, not in terms of just designing communities that people want to live in fundamentally. So it's not really a case of creating like senior housing, right? Multifamily, it's these sort of niche product types, really just collective communities or whole communities that really are attractive to a cross section of ages, demographics, just backgrounds in general. And so, certainly there are conventional tools from a finance perspective, that, on the affordable side, that we use on a day-to-day basis, like the low-income housing tax credit program, right? Where I think there's about $10 billion of, tax credit authority that's issued annually, to different states to implement, which is sort of a drop in the bucket when you think about it in terms of being able to really meet the demand. And the crisis that we're facing on the housing side, but at the local level and at the state level, in terms of incentivizing these sorts of communities, really looking at our qualified allocation plans, through, a tax credit regime, if that's the way, or people are using as a tool to access, to really sort of focus in on those things that really facilitate intergenerational living, both on the amenity side, but more specifically, and others noted, there's sort of a social services component that's so critical, right, to be able to address sort of the continuum of needs that people have at all ages. And so, certainly at the federal level, that's kind of one way that we could look at it. At the local level, certain things that, I'm operating within, zoning is one of the big tools that we can use, and we are using in my jurisdiction to help incentivize and encourage the type of multi-generational housing that considers things like orientation, access to transit, co-location with amenities that are necessary as well as appealing to all people at all different walks of life, specifically through the lens of like, co-location. I think that there's, from a planning perspective, there's been a loss in many ways on the importance of civic space. And so, many of the, sort of intergenerational communities that my organization is starting to look at is, how do you bake in, housing with a public facilities component, like a community center, a rec center, a library, in addition to sort of centering it, relative to transportation, other amenities, services, right? And so that's a useful tool that we have as well. Disposition of public land as well, where we make that a priority to private development community to develop these sorts of intergenerational neighborhoods where we can say from a very specific vantage point, we want to help. We need help. We want to create this sort of community. Can the private side help us deliver that as well? And I can go on and on, but I'm sure that other folks would want to chime in. But really, I am a firm believer at the local level, the jurisdictional level, government. We can play a big part in terms of filling the gap and bringing resources to bear that the private side might not otherwise be able to put forth.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So you've given us some ideas. Comment on the qualified application plan and talk to your local government folks about zoning changes and co-locating. And you got any available land? Those might be the questions we'd ask. Thank you, Mark. Thomas, as we've been promoting intergenerational living, all of us here on this call, have you noticed any existing or potential barriers to housing equity for populations that may be underserved or struggle with access to quality, affordable housing?
There's always, a lot of environmental, structural, and cultural factors that limit any time you have access to affordable housing, much less intergenerational housing. But I think particularly in the population we serve, where it's a lot of low-income immigrants, intergenerational housing is not something new. That is how families are supposed to be, and I think that they recognize that, and that's like a great kind of base to really also promote these ideas, and as we organize these communities for them to ask for it. For example, there was a question earlier on whether this will gain traction, whether people would look for it. Of the project that we built in Queens for 230 apartments, we had 85,000 applications. So certainly, like, the demand is like out there. Particularly in New York City, where we have affordability crisis as well as a lack of supply, which is also true throughout much of the country. We have to think of innovative ways where we unlock it. As Nia and Mark mentioned, is through policies, but also through zoning. New York City is going through a very potentially game-changing zoning change, an update to our plan, where there's going to be a lot of amendments, some in particular where I'm interested in following is particularly like a place like New York City that has already been very built up. We have the City of Yes proposal, pushed for by the mayor to unleash supply. But, in a place where there's not a lot of available land, sometimes we don't look at things like existing homes. And the intergenerational aspect of that is we're faced with a younger generation that may or may not be able to purchase a home in their lifetime. This has, because private equity is purchasing a lot of supply, mortgage rates, even though the interest rate has dropped a bit, it hasn't really, plummeted as we hoped, and it will never get back to the pandemic levels. So people aren't buying homes in the same rate they are 10 years ago, even. But with the City of Yes, for example, it allows for things like accessory dwelling units, homes with a garage. The garage can be, whether raised or rehab and retrofitted so that it passes like a standardized building code and become a granny cottage, so to speak. And this way, parents who have younger generations who themselves are never able to purchase a home can maybe now, occupy that. And it also allows for intergenerational households to stay intact, but provides space as well. So they're separate from the house so that, as people need their breathing room as well. And, looking at that model and phasing in more innovations, like, can there be a rent to own, like can the next generation start paying rent, but it goes towards an equity of purchasing that home eventually, from their parents. So those are ways that we can think about how we can do a lot of different things through intergenerational living, building wealth and assets, reviving, the American dream for the next generation, and dealing with scarcity of land for development to unleash existing, housing stock for, affordable housing supply.
Yeah, thank you. You bring up such an important point at the top of your remarks, Thomas, where living intergenerationally is natural for much of the world. As as far away as close as around the block and all over the world. And we're just leveraging the power of it. And many, many, many communities are leveraging the power every day. So I appreciate that. And I love the way you're all thinking about it. Here in Oregon, the accessory dwelling unit situation was a big deal, and policy changed, and it made a difference in the city for all the reasons you said. So there's a case sample, or case study here in Portland, Oregon. Mia, I'm going to come back to you. And what role can realtors play in helping make intergenerational living more common, to follow up on some of the things Thomas said?
Yeah, so I think intergenerational living already takes place. I mean, we found out that during COVID, and that it continues to take place, right? Like there are many families where there are, multi-generations and many generations living under one roof. So I think it already exists. I think bringing greater awareness to it and education. We also encourage realtors to be really community champions and advocates. And so, as I alluded to before and discussed, I think it's not only important for them to help families get into homes, but also to be champions in their communities, to advocate in support of greater opportunities for intergenerational living. So it goes back to definitely a lot of zoning reform is a big topic now, especially as we are grappling with supply issues. In our country, we are short actually over 5 million units, which is why the affordability crisis is what it is, right? So as we build and as we address supply issues, I think it's important that realtors and as community stakeholders and other policymakers and a lot of advocates as well really work to ensure that the housing stock that we create is a housing stock, one, that's sustainable, but that is also reflective of the communities that we live and that we need in order for all of us to thrive. And so I think it is an intergenerational approach and the type of housing stock and supply that we need going forward.
Thank you, Nia. Our time is gone so fast, you guys. So we only have time for one more question for each of you. And so I'm going to, if you all could just take a couple minutes to answer this question. I'm going to start with you, Mark. And here it is. If you had a magic wand, my favorite question, and you could use only one policy, and you could only use it once, what policy or finance change would you make to promote more intergenerational living? Let me do that again. If you had a magic wand and you could choose one policy or financing change to do, what would you do, Mark?
I would say by right development is, for me, the biggest issue is just having, local zoning ordinances in place that really encourage rather than discourage this sort of housing to meet, the demand challenges that we face.
Thank you. Thomas?
If I had a magic wand in the context of New York City, I would do a very quick, elimination of a lot of the barriers for office conversion into residential housing. That would unlock so much supply. I don't see, people coming back to work in the same way we will ever be, pre-pandemic, which is fine. We have to adapt. And, being flexible about building code so that, large footprint office spaces can be, retrofitted in a way to increase, different housing. Intergenerational, of course, comes to mind. And, with the kind of like a lot of the center core space that we find difficult converting into residential space, use that as the common space for the intergenerational living. I don't see that as like a huge barrier. And in fact, it presents a really great opportunity for that.
Yeah, thinking out of the box and using something that already exists to do what we needed to do. Yeah. And Nia.
I think I would really look closely at what is already working in terms of models and figure out how we can streamline the process to expedite creating additional intergenerational housing stock. But I think also figuring out the financing piece, because I think that is sometimes a huge barrier, and it is for some, in the minds of some, it's cost prohibitive. So figuring out ways that we can incentivize developers and also even institutional investors, I think it is worth having them be at the table to have a discussion around this as well. But figuring out really financing and breaking down the barriers there to that prohibit essentially creating this housing stock, and dispelling a lot of myths, because there are a lot of myths around why this model doesn't work.
Thank you, Nia. And thank you to all three of you for your work every day to build a more intergenerational place to live and housing and what you all do and your contributions to the blueprint. It's been delightful to have you here today, and it was delightful to be with you in March. So thank you again, and keep up the great work. Now I'll turn it back to Donna.
Thank you. Thank you, Derenda, Marvell, and all the panelists. I wish we were in person so I could lead a rousing round of applause, because it was just wonderful to hear your ideas and your stories. And Constance added so much heart. We saw that throughout the chat and with people's comments today. We're just grateful to each of you. And I really encourage you to check out each of the speakers, because there are fabulous programs, intergenerational housing and intergenerational living, that they're involved with in their communities. We all have so much to learn from each other. So you really brought the blueprint to life, the 4 strategies that Jennifer outlined earlier, and have inspired many people, as we can tell by the chat. And I love the fact that people have been answering each other's questions in the chat too. So please do check out the programs and definitely dig deeply into the blueprint. We can't do this work by ourselves, and we're looking to you to help at various levels with different stakeholders and to be leaders as well as partners in this work. So what I'm going to do now is highlight each of the strategies, a few of the action steps that we hope you will join us in, and tie these to the 6 essential stakeholder audiences that we've identified in the blueprint. And I would like you to be thinking about which of those audiences are you either a part of or you have influence with, so you can make sure to take these messages forward. So the 4 strategies: first was research, building the evidence needed to make the case for intergenerational living. We know it's consumer driven. It's what people want. We hear that all the time. We need to prove that it's what people want, and we need to prove that it works. Second, communication, creating a compelling narrative to encourage individuals, organizations, and others who can move intergenerational living from niche to necessary. Third, policy and finance, advancing policies and funding mechanisms, including prioritizing intergenerational housing in state and local plans. And fourth, promote promising practices and design elements that foster intergenerational interaction. So how can these strategies relate to the blueprint's call to action and the 6 key stakeholder audiences? These are just a few ideas for each audience. First, local governments. Local governments can make publicly owned land and underused real estate available for developing intergenerational living, as we saw a lot going on in the chat around how do you convert office buildings, but there's other space and other places too. Engage diverse older and younger people in planning processes. Think about the ideas that Constance brings to the table that some of us that do this as a profession would never think to bring to the table. Ensure that local zoning allows and encourages multifamily options with shared amenities and common space, and includes models like senior housing on or adjacent to campuses. Second, state governments. State governments can call out intergenerational housing in their state housing plans and prioritize them in their state qualified allocation plans, streamline and expedite approval processes, commit funding via state housing trust funds, and give preference to sites that propose serving all generations or more than just one generation. Third, federal government. Federal government can increase the supply of affordable intergenerational housing options, prioritizing using low-income housing tax credits for these models. Ensure housing funding opportunities include support for adequate common space that helps build community. That's the hardest space to fund and the most important when you're developing the heart of a community. And integrate and align funding for supportive services with housing resources to ensure sustainability. Fourth, philanthropy. Philanthropy can fund developing a compelling communications campaign. They can fund research, toolkit creation, providing funding to fill gaps that the government dollars can't support, and invest in pilot programs that result in proof of concept. Again, building the evidence, building the case. Fifth, corporations. Corporations can invest in intergenerational living to attract and retain qualified workforce. Workers need childcare, they need older adult care, they need this type of community to really support the family, the entire family. Partner invest to develop market rate and affordable intergenerational housing options, and work with government to develop land or vacant buildings that aren't being used to develop more intergenerational housing options. And sixth, managed care and health insurance companies specifically. These can provide more robust coverage of in-home supports and services to help older adults remain in their communities and be surrounded by people of all ages. All of these can and should be levers of change that can scale intergenerational living. For additional detail and specific recommendations, dig deeply into the blueprint, stay in touch, join our learning community, help keep us informed about what's going on that's so rich in your community and in your work. Intergenerational living is far from just a nice luxury. It's a critical solution to mending our frayed communities, building stronger neighborhoods, overcoming ageism, and supporting families and individuals to live healthier, connected lives. Intergenerational living is the way of the future and celebrates the fact that we are stronger together. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Alonka Walker, Generations United's Intergenerational Coordinator, who's leading our work to accelerate intergenerational living. She deserves a hearty round of applause for coordinating today's release event, along with the entire Generations United team, who helped bring the blueprint and today's release event to fruition. Go Team GU, you are the best, and we can't do it alone. We are stronger together. So thank you, Alonka. It's yours to bring home.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to our terrific panelists, moderators, and speakers for joining us today. We really appreciated the conversation and learning from you all. As we close, I want to invite you to stay connected with Generations United in this work. We have 3 immediate opportunities for everyone to engage in. The first one is, I hope you will join us at our 23rd Global Intergenerational Conference taking place June 25th through the 27th in 2025 in Louisville, Kentucky. Register soon to take advantage of the lowest possible rates. More details about registration and how to present are available at www.guconf.org. This will also be dropped in the chat, so you can use the link. The next opportunity for you to stay connected with us is Generations United is now accepting applications to recognize outstanding intergenerational programs, including intergenerational housing models that connect younger and older people in the United States. The Program of Distinctions and Merit are designations that are based upon the criteria of underpinning any intergenerational program's effectiveness and are intended to recognize the rich diversity among these programs that involve both older and younger generations. These applications are due November 7th, 2024, and you can scan the QR code or click the link that will be placed in the chat. Next, if you are interested in this topic and really staying connected with us and learning more about intergenerational housing as a whole, please feel free to reach out to my email and sign up for the Intergenerational Housing Learning Network, where we meet quarterly to feature different housing models, discuss best practices in intergenerational housing, and so much more. You can sign up by just emailing me at iwalker@gu.org, and I will add you to the email list so you can join that learning community where we just build off the ideas of one another, join in those presentations from experts, and get more information about intergenerational housing. Lastly, we like to thank everyone for your participation, your insightful contributions, and your mentionings in the chat, answering each other's questions, and really pouring out information with one another, and the enthusiasm behind this topic and for the blueprint itself. Together, we can foster community, connection, and understanding across generations. Let's continue to carry this momentum forward as we work to create inclusive spaces that truly reflects the needs of all ages. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and please scan to access the blueprint, and it is now live on our website. Thank you.